We talk about Europe being in crisis now. Europe has been in crisis many times before. The 1400s and the 1500s, the northern people coming in, the Ottoman Empire, the end of Muslim Spain, the Renaissance, European expansion to Portugal, Spain and the New Worlds, and of course what we're going to be celebrating in a couple of years' time, 500 years since Luther put his bill on the wall of the cathedral, when the fragmentation of Christianity began. And maybe after 500 years we're at a point where Christianity is the important thing that we share in Europe, not necessarily just our Catholicism. Maybe it's time for that fragmentation to come back in some way into the future. Obviously, from the point of view of the Marist fathers, a very important development was in the 1600s when Australia, New Zealand and Oceania became part of Europe's perspective, because my understanding is that after your foundation, many of your people went to those areas and they became a very important part. The 1700s, the Enlightenment, science and technology, and of course then the French Revolution. And again, if you want crisis, think about the French Revolution and what it did to France and the turmoil that was there. And out of that post-revolutionary France, we have the Society of Marian. We have Father Colin founding your own Marist Fathers in 1816. And out of that same group of seminarians, you have Father Champagne founding the Marist Brothers. And then you have the Marist Sisters with Mother Jeanne-Marie Chavoin very shortly afterwards. So out of that post-revolutionary France, we get something which is living today. For example, in the Marist Brothers, we have the Marists in 77 countries teaching 500,000 pupils as we speak, still around the world. Yes, in northwestern Europe, the order is shrinking in the sense of most Western European, institutional areas are shrinking, but in other parts of the world, it's expanding. So we've got to look not alone at Europe, we have to look outside as well. Obviously, as we come nearer our own time in the 1800s and the 1900s, the Industrial Revolution, nationalism, our Germany and Italy re-emerge, the scramble for Africa, another European legacy which we're still dealing with today, the European tensions which led to World War I, World War II, Marxist communism as an approach to society, and then the European Economic Community, which has become the EU. And I think it's very interesting that when we look at EU past and present, that those early founders call it the European Economic Community. I think that word was very important. Now we call it the European Union. But when we look at those founding values from Monet and Schuman and Adenauer, and all of those were Catholics, interestingly, people who had a worldview which came through in a particular way, and they looked at peace and community as the objectives, the early objectives of the European Union. And I think we shouldn't forget that as we sit in the room here. On the doorway on the way into this building is Pax et Bonum. It's the same concept, and yet we consider that a very religious thing. I think sometimes we have been so successful that the Christian worldview is seen almost as a secular worldview now, because that's the way it is. And that Christian worldview, we're obviously suffering from an internal secularization now. The earlier one came from outside. Now we have a debate inside. And as I said, immigration has always been part of our history, and now the focus is on Islam. And the question is Islam friend or foe? And when you speak to people who have significant Muslim populations within their countries, and some of you here will know more about this than I, there is both points of view. There is one that says, here is another Abrahamic religion. Here is another religion that has a central view of one God, with the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, and then why would we not be cooperating with each other? And the other then says, hold on a second, if we go in that direction, are we going to have Sharia law and everything else? So there's a debate and a difficulty for us in terms of this. We also have the economic crisis. In the East, the Marxist state alone was proved not to be the answer. I think the recent situation we find ourselves in the West is that the free market alone is not the answer either. And indeed, European policymakers now are looking very much, this diagram here came from Wim van der Donk. Some of you from the Netherlands may know of him. He was an advisor to the Dutch government. And he talked about the fact that in the 1980s there was a kind of linear view of, you said, on the one hand there's the state very strong like in France, and in the other hand the market very strong like in Britain under Thatcher, where individualism was very important. And people said, where are you on this line? And they're saying, no, that's not the way to look at the world. To look at the world as a triangle. The state is important, the market is important, but community is vital. And that community may be a country, or it may be a family, or it may be a society like the Marist fathers. But the point is that the voluntary independent sector, which we have in many of our schools through Europe in the Catholic school communities, is something that the European Union now feels this is the way forward. What we have is something that other people are looking for, and we shouldn't forget that as we think about messages for hope. On the next page, looking at the European Union, as I say, the value of the independent voluntary sector in the regions is very important. We have regions like the Basque country. We have regions like Northern Ireland in our particular case, a very difficult area. So, but yet there must be different solutions for different parts of Europe, and that's what I think European Union understands. So pluralism can mean very many different things. Finally, in summary, our voluntary Catholic schools are underpinned by European values, charters and laws. It's important for us to be aware of the European trends. The Netherlands, I'm a member of a European committee, which is where my interest is, and I meet a colleague from the Netherlands regularly. And I say to him, tell me the future, please. Because what's happening in the Netherlands now will be happening in Ireland maybe in 20 years' time. So we've got to be aware of European developments. Secularization in the place of religion, yes, let's keep debating that. The European Court, we need to make sure that we understand what's going on there, and our European MPs. We can't live in a bubble. We have to live in the real world, but nevertheless that real world does have things to offer us. Others believe in what we have to offer. Let's continue to be confident. So as I said earlier, Passau struck me as an interesting place for this, a meeting of three rivers. Passau Marist as a meeting of three traditions. The independent state-funded Catholic school is a way of the future. For example, the academies in England, which our colleagues here will tell you more about, are a new development over the past number of years, which are Catholic schools and other types of schools coming out of state control and yet staying with state funding. So here we are in the year of faith. I hope I've given you a message of hope, all based on Christ's message of love. So thank you very much for your attention.